Hey everybody, it's Isaac here, and as you will soon find out, I am without a co-host today. As you can see, there's nobody in here. It's just me in the studio, all on my lonesome. Some of you may be aware, if you keep up with us on our social medias and stuff, Derek, my lovely co-host of That Was Horrible, is experiencing the wonders of fatherhood right now, which is a beautiful journey that I'm very excited for him for, but that means in the meantime, he's going to have to take a little break, probably a very, very brief break for a second to go be a father, and that's incredible for him. But in the meantime, I thought it'd be a good opportunity for me to try out a little project that I've been thinking about for a minute. I love monsters and monster movies, and so I've had this idea rocking around in my head for a little bit to make a little, I don't know, mini series, I guess at the moment is what we'll call it, where I basically will break down and dive into the importance of monster movies to me. So this is just a little solo Isaac project. So Derek's going to be a dad, I'm going to be a monster freak, and it's going to be a good time. We'll be back to your regularly scheduled That Was Horrible antics very, very soon. But in the meantime, without further ado, I guess let's get started. Here is the first episode of what I'm going to call Monsterific. Hello, creatures of the night. Welcome to the very first episode of Monsterific, a deep dive into creature features and the monsters that made them. I am your creature preacher, Isaac, here to tell you about the monstrous work that goes into making iconic monsters big and small, and I'm so excited to have you here today. I get to sit and gush about something that I love, and that's really exciting for me. So thank you if you have chosen to listen to this. If you're a fan of That Was Horrible and you decided to stick around to let Isaac try out his little silly fun thing. This is a project that I've had in the works for probably about a year, I want to say, is how long I've considered making something like this. It's just something that really interested me every time Derek and I have been watching a movie for That Was Horrible. Anytime we get to the part that involves a monster, I find myself just wanting to talk and dive into that in great lengths. And so I thought, why not try having just my own little show where I sit and talk about these kinds of things. If you don't know, I'm a big, big fan of monsters, monster movies. It's always something that has appealed to me greatly. I'm not entirely sure why. I'm not entirely sure where it started. I know my dad watched a lot of horror when I was a kid, and so I think that bled into my interests. I can remember several instances of him watching horror movies, telling me not to watch them, and then I did anyway without any regard for my mental health and what that would do to me later on in my life. But yeah, monsters have always been a big part of me and my interests, and I've always found them incredibly fascinating. And that goes way, way, way back. And so that goes way, way, way back to certain older movies. I don't know if you guys are aware, but I have not shut up about the recent release of Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein from 2025.
What manner of creature is that? What manner of devil made him? I did.
It's a movie that I've been incredibly excited about. It finally came out. I drove a great, great distance to go check it out all the way in LA. I live in Utah. It was a 10-hour drive to get from here all the way there just to check it out at the beautiful Egyptian Theater out in LA. And guys, it is so good. It's so incredible. I was living for it. It's truly a masterpiece of work. And it's just the pinnacle of what there is about monster movies and about the creatures within them, and then specifically like the sympathetic monsters, which there's actually a lot of. Guillermo del Toro has probably been my biggest inspiration as far as like monster lovers, I guess you want to say. Not in like a creepy, gross way, even though I know a lot of people flow that way, and that's fine. But Guillermo del Toro has such a love and a reverence for these creatures and understanding the misunderstood. And I think that's probably something about them that really draws me towards them, is that I think myself and many other people can relate to feeling misunderstood and out of place, fish out of water, that kind of stuff. And I think monsters really showcase that a lot. There's actually a beautiful quote that I love from Guillermo del Toro that says, "Monsters, I believe, are the patron saints of our blissful imperfection, and they allow and embody the possibility of failing." It's just, this guy gets monsters. He truly, truly does. So Guillermo del Toro released Frankenstein this year, 2025, his life's work. Been working on this basically since he was 7 years old when he first saw the movie. We're not here to talk about that one, though. We are here to talk about basically what Guillermo del Toro references as the time he saw the Messiah, which is so incredible to me. He was raised in an incredibly Catholic upbringing, right? And There's a lot of imagery of the Messiah and these kinds of things that he understood. He sees these, but it didn't really hit him. It didn't connect to his core. Not until one Sunday he was watching the television and he saw James Whale's Frankenstein from 1931.
When this dead hand moves, the monster created by a man they called mad is turned loose to strike terror into the hearts of men.
This is a movie that truly changed him as a person, and it's something that truly, I feel changed me as a person as well, and really put into perspective the creatures in movies and the importance of them, what goes into making them. They are such important movies. And this movie is incredibly iconic. It is such an important piece of film history, not only just for monster movies, but also for movies as an entirety, just the entirety of movie history. I can't really remember when I came into knowing Frankenstein as a movie. It's just something that I think everybody is kind of aware of. It is something that everybody knows. If you walk around on the street, grab 10 people and ask them to tell you what Frankenstein looks like, right? Tell them to describe him, to draw him. Everybody will probably go to the 1931 version of Frankenstein, the monster Frankenstein specifically. Now let's get ahead of this right here, right now. I know that there's a difference between Dr. Frankenstein and Dr. Frankenstein's monster. There's a lot of people that will mix the two of those two together, some of them just calling the monster Frankenstein himself. I personally don't have a huge issue with that. I know what you're talking about. And this is coming from a man who is a very big fan of Frankenstein as a story, as a movie, as a character, all of that stuff. I don't really mind. And I think Guillermo del Toro, who's also probably the biggest Frankenstein fan, has also said himself, it doesn't truly bother him that much. But if you're that kind of person, that's your story there. But everybody knows Frankenstein as a character, as his importance within pop culture, the zeitgeist of it all. Even people who have never even seen the movie, never bothered to read the book, anything like that, most people know of him, be it just from the visits that you see in all of the Halloween merch all over the place, or if it's the iconic scene, that it's alive scene that everybody knows. It's just, it's incredible. It's so important to Western culture. It's like, it's Elvis Presley, it's Marilyn Monroe, it's Mickey Mouse. It is something that is so ingrained in our culture and so important to us. But yeah, I don't remember the first time that I actually sat down to watch Frankenstein as a movie. I remember it was probably later in my adulthood, I want to say after high school, probably, when I decided that monsters were kind of my thing and horror was absolutely my bag. And I really found a love for these old school monster movies, the classic Universal monster movies going back to Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Invisible Man, all of those kinds of things. They spoke to me. I really, really enjoyed them. Not just from a shitty, like, I'm a hipster and I'm into these old black and white movies kind of stuff. No, I think there is something truly so important about these old movies, not just from a historical standpoint, but a lot of these movies do really stand the test of time. But yeah, I can't remember the first time that I actually watched the movie, but I do remember once in high school, I had chosen Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as the subject of my book report that I had to do. And I was a lazy student. I never got around to doing the shit that I was supposed to. So instead, I pretended that I read the book, and part of the book report was we were supposed to bring in some kind of dish or food that pertained to it. And so my original thought process, I thought I was super smart. I was like, oh, I'll do Frankenstein. And I remembered that somewhere in my storage unit, we had a brain mold, or like a Jell-O mold that was in the shape of a brain. And I thought, oh, perfect. I'll make a thing of Jell-O in the shape of a brain, like, the brain that goes inside the monster. I'm a genius and it'll work. First of all, I could not find this Jell-O mold. I could have swore we had it. In fact, we did have it. I found it later after the project was already due, but couldn't find the mold. And so instead, what I decided to do is a super, super last minute thing. Never having read the book, didn't know what the hell I was talking about. I brought in Mountain Dew voltage and I thought, like the volts that go into the monster, which is so, so funny to me. Because had I read the book, I would have understood that is something that was fabricated within the 1931 movie. It's not actually something that takes place in Mary Shelley's 1818 novel. So egg on my face a little bit there. But yeah, so that is the movie that I've decided to discuss today. And I guess without further ado, let's quit dancing around let's quit beating around the windmill and let's get into what became the movie James Whale's 1931 Frankenstein.
This is the story you've heard about, talked about. The spine-tingling, blood-chilling story that stuns your emotions. Frankenstein.
Frankenstein is a 1931 America pre-code science fiction gothic horror film, that's a mouthful, directed by James Whale, produced by Carl Laemmle Jr., and adapted from a 1927 play, 1927, which was called Frankenstein: An Adventure in the Macabre, which was put together by Peggy Webling, which I actually think was an unproduced version of the play that they bought the rights for. But that in turn was an adaptation of Mary Shelley's 1818 novel Frankenstein. And actually, I've also read that there was also inspiration. There's like levels to this kind of thing. Mary Shelley writes the book in 1818. Then we have 1823. I want to say there was a play already. Like Mary Shelley was literally alive to be able to see this. There was a play called Presumption, or The Fate of Frankenstein, which is actually where some of the ideas that made its way into James Whale's movie in 1931 came from. For instance, the character of Fritz, who most people actually know as Igor, which is not Igor, he's Fritz in this movie, and we'll get to that later. He was created and fabricated for the purposes of this story here. So yeah, there are some elements that didn't exist at all within the book that you do see in the movie, and like this is where those ideas kind of start, was in this first play, Presumption, in 1823, or The Fate of Frankenstein, and then later another play, which was titled Frankenstein, An Adventure in the Macabre by Peggy Webling, which was bought and then turned into what we know as Frankenstein 1931 by James Whale. Now, Frankenstein originally, let's go all the way back to 1818 with Mary Shelley. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, at just 19 years old, wrote the original novel in 1818 titled Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, which is a great subtitle to that a lot of people leave out, and I think it's actually super important here, which was then revised in 1923 and again in 1931. There was a couple different revisions of this one, but 19 years old, I could not imagine making something this profound and compelling. But it's so funny that it is so revered as a classic piece of literature and so important in it. It is also brimming with these teenage feelings of angst and these deep questions and a misunderstanding of the world and wanting to make sense of it. So it's actually like full to the brim with like teenage angst in it, which is great. That doesn't discredit any of the work that goes into it. But I think it's a really neat story that she wrote at such a young age. I cannot imagine. But it's not surprising that she was able to put something like this together. She was born of great minds. I mean, her father was the political philosopher William Godwin, and her mother was the philosopher and women's rights activist Mary Wollstonecraft. They both did very important work in their day and age. So it's not surprising that she would also make something so profound at her day and age. But it's kind of funny. It actually came around kind of as like a party trick kind of thing. It was almost the rumor, the legend around is that it basically came around as a dare. It was her husband Percy, and then their friend Lord Byron, who was also all of them poets, all of them writers and such. Basically, somebody had posed the question while they were stuck off of Lake Geneva in this wonderful villa. The weather turned south, and it was just ruining their trip. So really, all they got to do was stick inside, write, tell stories. And so basically, the prompt came to them as, let's write ghost stories. Let's try to write the scariest story and tell it to each other. And this is where the story of Frankenstein comes from. Some reports say basically it came of a dream that Mary Shelley had, basically talking about the ideas of the scientist and his creation. And here is a quote from her on the matter. She says, "I saw with shut eyes, but acute mental vision, I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world." And this is what became Frankenstein, guys. That is incredible. So Frankenstein, also known as the modern Prometheus. Now you might be asking yourself, why is it called the modern Prometheus? Well, the story of Prometheus is essentially, it's a Greek myth about a titan who was punished for his love of humanity. He stole fire from the gods for humans who he loved, who were then living in a cold and this darkness, right? And then as punishment for this, he was chained to a rock where an eagle would eat his liver each day, only for it to grow back overnight. Pretty gruesome story. All of Greek mythology kind of is like that. But I mean, both Victor Frankenstein in the story and the mythological figure Prometheus are creators who defy the gods and face severe consequences for their hubris. Prometheus stole fire from the gods to give to humanity, while Victor Frankenstein, I guess, stole the secret of life through scientific endeavor, which is just such a cool, like, God, Mary Shelley, you're a genius, and I love this so much. This is mostly just going to be me gushing about how much I love Frankenstein. That's why I chose this monster for the very first episode of Monsterific. Universal Studios was coming on hard times with a huge loss in revenues. We're talking like this is basically right around the worst time of the Great Depression, right here and there in the 1920s and 30s. So they basically had lost about $2.2 million in their revenues, and they had just had this huge hit on their hands with a little movie you might know known as Dracula in 1931. It was released in February of this year, starring Bela Lugosi as the titular iconic vampire. You know all about Dracula. Everybody knows this. Just like Frankenstein is incredibly iconic in the zeitgeist of Western culture, there is also Dracula to be accredited at the same time. So Dracula had come out. It was a huge success, actually. So they jumped on this immediately, aiming to just go straight into making another horror movie based off of like a popular piece of classic literature. And so on this success, they decided to acquire the rights to Peggy Webling's play, which was released in November of the same year as James Whale's Frankenstein. But yeah, basically, Carl Laemmle Sr. was not fond of these horror movies. He didn't think there was a huge, space for it. There wasn't going to be any success in it. Universal Studios at the time was mostly into making like wartime movies, especially after World War I had just finished up within the last few years. And so it was actually Carl Laemmle Jr. who was like, I think we can do something with this. And after Dracula was such a success, he said, hey, Dad, you're an idiot. And so now I'm going to just like pour all of my efforts into making another horror film. So now we have Frankenstein. Carl Laemmle Jr. offered James Whale a list of 30 plus film adaptations he could direct, and Whale picked this one. Whale said he did so because he wanted to get away from the war pictures with which he had been associated at the time, which is funny because Whale is now by far best remembered for his 4 horror films, starting with Frankenstein, moving on to The Old Dark House, The Invisible Man, and then The Bride of Frankenstein are probably his most notable films. But I think it's really interesting that he had his run-of-the-mill of like a couple different projects that he got to pick from. And he chose to do Frankenstein, which is a story about, this misunderstood creature trying to find its way in this world and facing the horrors of man who see it just immediately as this creature, as this grotesque thing, abandoned by his father, born without a mother. Like this, it's a story of an outsider, truly. And I think James Whale really connected with that because he was actually an openly gay man in the 1930s, which has to be, it's hard to do that just in today's age in 2025 when I'm recording this, but I can't imagine the struggles that you must have gone through in the 1930s to be this way. So yes, absolutely, James Whale was an outsider and probably saw something within this story here to tell in this, and I think that's really, really wonderful. Bela Lugosi was originally brought in to play the role of the monster, but turned it down because he did not want to be a silent, lumbering being. He actually wanted to play the Doctor instead. But the Universal execs wanted to keep him in the role of the antagonist monster. So instead, we get the wonderful talents of Boris Karloff playing the iconic monster. Now, it was Bela Lugosi that was originally pegged to do this movie. In fact, they wanted to make buzz for the movie and bring people in before the movie had even started productions. So there actually exist posters that say Frankenstein on it with this like big, gigantic creature. And it has Bela Lugosi's name on it, even though he didn't actually end up being the one to play this role in the actual film. And also, James Whale was not the first director that was attached to it. There was actually Robert Florey before there was even a James Whale attached to this. Now, Robert Florey made incredible contributions to the actual writing of the script and what you kind of know in this. But it was a much, specifically in the terms of the creature, it was a much smaller part, and I can understand why Bela Lugosi might not want to play it. He was more just a lumbering creature. He was silent, just spoke in the grunts. He did not have the kind of sympathy that we know because James Whale and Boris Karloff came together to make this creature what it is now. And I think it's really interesting that it started that way, but I can understand why Bela Lugosi wouldn't want to be a part of it the way that the script had started for this. But there was actually a screen test done with Bela Lugosi in the makeup, and it's kind of lost to time what actually happened with this. We're not sure whether or not they didn't like it. Some people say that they laughed at it. Some people say that they really enjoyed it. I'm not entirely sure, but whatever happened, Bela Lugosi lost out on the part. He walked away from the project. It didn't end up working. And Robert Florey also at some point was gone from the project as well. Even though in the final project, they did actually use a decent amount of his ideas that he took from the other play iterations of the story as well, right? We're talking the things like the creature coming to life from a strike of electricity is part of it. The Fritz as a character again. The windmill scene at the very end of the movie, all of these come kind of from his writings in it. And for a long time, actually, he got no credit in it. And eventually Universal Studios gave him the credit that he wanted, but in foreign, like in its release in other countries. So there's actually like French posters for the movie that give him a small credit in it. However, later on, he did kind of get his way where actually Robert Florey and Bela Lugosi joined forces and they made The Murders in the Rue Morgue not too long after this one, which really did kind of have the vibe that he was going for with this movie initially. But to make a long story short, eventually James Whale was the one that came in and finished the project here. Now, when it comes to him finding Boris Karloff and how this came through, it's actually some kind of beautiful serendipity the way these two came together. Basically, he was on the hunt for somebody, and then at the Universal Studios commissary, just sitting in a lovely suit, hair done up, looking, his best, according to his daughter, Sarah Karloff. She says that it's funny that he was approached on this day where he felt he was looking his best. Basically, what had happened was either James Whale or an assistant of James Whale had come to him or slipped him a note that said, "Hey, why don't you come and do a test screening or like a screen test for this movie I'm working on called Frankenstein? We think you've got the right characteristics to play our monster." And Boris Karloff kind of like lovingly jokes about the fact that he's like, "Well, I thought I was looking my best that day and you came and approached me to play this monster." But he would have been a fool not to jump on this project. And so him kind of being like, wanting to make it in this world of movies and make it over here at Universal Studios, jumped on the project immediately. Now, this is an insane fact. Guess how old Boris Karloff was when he did this movie and how many projects he had under his belt before taking on this project. I'll give you a moment. Did you guess that he was 44 years old and this would be his 81st acting credit? That's insane. So if anybody tries to tell you that you're past your prime, it's far too late, tell them no, because Boris Karloff was 44 and he had done 80 movies before this. It's pretty insane how this came to be, but this is the movie that would propel him into stardom after all of these times, after all this basically, living the starving artist lifestyle. He finally got his break here with a movie where he didn't even get to talk, which is so funny to me because his voice is something that he is like also as much as his portrayal of the monster in Frankenstein, he is also known for having this incredibly deep voice. His British, it sounds so good. If you remember the animated version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, he plays the Grinch and also narrates that story. So he has got a very, very iconic voice, which is so funny to me because he started off basically as a silent actor with no lines in the movie, which is a huge departure from the way Mary Shelley had originated the role in the book. In the book, the creature is incredibly profoundly poetic and he's philosophic about the way that he talks and monologues and thinks about life and the questions that he asks. So it's a huge departure that in the movie, he actually doesn't say a word, which is kind of funny. But this movie really did take off and it really spawned a wide variety of sequels here. There's The Bride of Frankenstein in 1935. There's Son of Frankenstein 1939, which would actually be the last full film appearance of Karloff as the monster. And also introducing Bela Lugosi as Igor, not quite as a hunchback assistant, but a character that shared the name. And these lines kind of get blurred here. And so Fritz eventually becomes Igor in the public eye, right? There's also Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, 1943, where Bela Lugosi finally ends up playing the monster after he had turned it down so many years ago. There was House of Frankenstein, 1944, with Karloff back, but as the mad doctor, playing the mad scientist role in this one instead of the monster. No, instead we get Glenn Strange taking his turn as the monster. And then there's also House of Dracula, 1945, and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948. But it's incredibly well known. Everybody loves the story of Frankenstein. Well, not everybody loves it, but everybody knows of it, right? And it's gone to inspire lots of movies you may also know. I mean, think about movies like Lisa Frankenstein. It has Frankenstein literally in the name. Poor Things also came out. Frankenweenie, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Reanimator, Frankenhooker. It is all over the place. You can't get enough of Frankenstein. It is truly a movie that has stood the test of time. And after I've gone back to watch it just a few times for this episode here, it truly does not feel dated. I know people give a lot of shit to older black and white movies, but there is something so important and valuable here. It really, really does stand the test of time. Not only the movie of Frankenstein from 1931, but also the story of Frankenstein all the way back to 1818 with Mary Shelley's original text. It is truly, truly something to behold. Now, as far as casts of this movies go, we have Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein. Now, you might be asking yourself, don't you mean Victor Frankenstein? No, I don't. So something strange happened here. I've seen some reports that say this is something that started all the way in the 1927 play adaptation of it. But basically, Dr. Victor Frankenstein was renamed to Henry because it was decided that Victor would sound too severe and unfriendly to American audiences at the time. So Henry Frankenstein becomes Victor Frankenstein. And if you know the story of Frankenstein, you'll know that Victor's best friend in the book, his name is Henry Clerval. So they basically took the name from him, plucked it away, gave it to Victor, and then swapped the two in this version of the story. So now in this movie, Henry is the doctor and Victor is actually his good friend. So yeah, that's going to be a little confusing. It confuses me every single time that I watch it, but that's how it is here. So Colin Clive playing Henry Frankenstein, Mae Clark as Elizabeth Lavenza, John Bowles as Victor, again, not Henry, but Victor Moritz, and then Boris Karloff as the monster. The most difficult aspect of casting this movie was absolutely the monster, and I think they truly, truly nailed it in a character like this, in this actor who really took a lot of care for this creature and this important character within the story and didn't let it be something so simple as, oh, well, he's just a lumbering creature who does nothing. And he brought so much more to the role, and we'll get into that as we discuss the movie. We've also got Edward Van Sloan as Dr. Waldman, who, funny enough, so these next two actors here, they had made a name for themselves in another Universal horror project, the only one before this, Dracula. Well, I guess there was also the earlier versions of like the Phantom of the Opera, but Dracula had Edward Van Sloan, who played Dr. Van Helsing, and we also have Dwight Fry as Fritz, who's Henry's assistant in this, previously Renfield in Dracula. So we got two of these characters pretty much one for one playing the exact same characters they had just gotten some notoriety for in Dracula. But yeah, it's pretty funny that these two come in and they change the roles enough that it's still really entertaining to watch them. But like, it's so funny to me that they are just like, basically take Renfield and Van Helsing, put them in Frankenstein. There they are again. You know enough about these characters now. But so we are here to discuss Frankenstein, not only as a movie, but also Dr. Frankenstein's monster as a creature. Now, what was the general audience's response to this creature? Well, I don't know if you guys take a journey with me here for a second and try to bring yourself back to 1931. I know it's 2025. We've seen a lot of crazy stuff as far as grotesque monsters and gory kills that just like really push the envelope on what we are showing on screens these days. But try to travel back all the way down to 1931. Put yourself in the seat of a theater goer there and just imagine what it would be to see something, because you had never seen anything like this on a screen. You had never seen a monster that looked quite like Boris Karloff due to the wonderful work of Jack Pierce, who was the head of the makeup department at Universal Studios. It is truly something to behold. It is actually so frightening that on set, Boris Karloff had to be covered with a sack over his head and walked between the sets because there were people that were reportedly fainting while he would walk past them. He was so scary to them. So how does that hold up today? Well, I think, we go back, we look at Frankenstein. I think not only do we think, oh, it's just such a dated look, like how is that scary? But I also think we are so familiar with the look of Frankenstein's creature, right? Because we all know him. He's got the thick brow, the squared off forehead here. He's got those hollow sunken eyes, the electrodes in his neck that people usually mistake for bolts. They're actually positive and negative electrodes that basically allow for the power to surge through him, the electricity to get into his body to then animate him, right? But so I think we look at him now and that's kind of like, hey, that's my friend Frankenstein. But like, you have to remember, this guy was kind of terrifying. So I don't think he's quite as scary now, but I do think you can really look upon him and respect him for what he is and what he did in this movie here, right? And so not only did audiences find this movie terrifying, they also loved it. It is a rare thing where this movie was not only loved and appraised by just audiences, just like by moviegoers, it was also critically acclaimed as a hit immediately. Not only that, but I feel like it still feels that way. We can watch it in today's day and age, go back and watch this film, and it still is such an important piece of film. And we can still see it as like, wow, this is a fantastic movie. It doesn't feel dated just because it's an old black and white movie. I think it actually really, really does stand the test of time. But I think I've gone on long enough going off about Frankenstein and how much I enjoy it and how important it is. I think it's time to get into the nitty gritty of this. So without further ado, I think it is time to bring this episode to life with an electric breakdown of James Whale's Frankenstein, 1931. The movie starts out with an introduction from Edward Van Sloan stepping out from behind a curtain and delivering a cautionary monologue, which is actually really neat because this was how Dracula apparently had originally ended. It was basically Edward Van Sloan, again, who had just played Van Helsing in the movie. He came out and said, all of this is fictitious. We've all been putting on an act here, so please go home. Don't worry about it after you close the door. You know, these things are not going to hurt you. But then immediately cuts it with a dark joke and says, remember that after all, there are such things as vampires, which is just, I love the theatricality of it, because I think we're at a time where movies being talkies, as they called them, right? Because at this point, you know, movies have been silent up until about 1927. So these new speaking films that had actual lines of dialogue in them, were still hearkening back to like the times of the stage, right? You know, theater performances and all that kind of stuff. So I really feel like this is something that harkens back to that. And I think it's a great way to bring you into the vibe of the movie. So basically, Edward Van Sloan starts out by saying, how do you do?
Mr. Carl Emley feels it would be a little unkind to present this picture without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image, without reckoning upon God.
It's such a great way to start this movie, just basically by saying like, it's just a warning and really sets you in. Like, I think it's such a confident way to start your movie by saying, we know we're going to scare you. So just keep that in mind before you go into this. And I love how he ends it with, I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to, well, we warned you, which is just such a bold way to get into the movie, saying, good luck, kids. I think it may sound silly to audiences today, but I think back to like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? Where it basically starts with these images of this brutality, and it starts with this little thing about like, all of the events you're seeing are true, you know, these are based on true events. And think about how that hits you and how that feels. That's basically what this was to audiences in 1931, right? But we start out with this introduction, and then we get into, you know, the title card, Frankenstein. So the funny thing is, we've got the introduction of the characters here, their opening credits. The monster is credited at the beginning with a question mark, which I actually really love. Apparently, this is also what they did in the play adaptations of the movie. They just credited him with a question mark. It didn't actually bring any humanity to him, which I think is so fun, because like, while Boris Karloff wasn't a huge name at the time, I do think it is so neat to add this like air of mystery around. We don't even know what is playing the monster as it is titled in this thing. It's just a question mark. It is just a mystery to us. And I think that is so wonderful. And I think Mary Shelley, or the James Whale's Frankenstein here, does such a good job at delaying the monster and building up this scary fear around what you're about to see on stage. We don't know what's about to happen, right? And speaking of credits, Mary Shelley is credited at the beginning of this movie. However, she is credited as Mrs. Percy B. Shelley, her goddamn husband. She is credited with her husband's name, not even herself. I do appreciate that Peggy Webling gets a credit here, but it's just one of those things that reminds you, yeah, it really was the 1930s. Times were different here. I actually think when Mary Shelley had originally published Frankenstein in 1818, it went anonymously published just because, you know, nobody wants to read a story, you know, written by a lady back in the 1930s because they're all sexist and awful. But, you know, she pioneered basically what is known as science fiction, one of the very first science fiction novels, Frankenstein. So screw you guys. Give her name. Say it. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Screw you, Percy. I mean, I'm sure he's fine, but, you know, it's kind of sad that she doesn't get her own credit here. So we start out in the Bavarian Alps with Henry Frankenstein and his assistant Fritz, who is a hunchback assistant to him, right? So let's talk a little bit about Fritz as a character here. So Dwight Fry plays his character, his lab assistant, and is the main source for what is known as Igor in the public imagination, right? Though this character is named Fritz, Fritz did not originate in the earliest Frankenstein novel, but in the earliest recorded play adaptation, Presumption, like I mentioned earlier, or The Fate of Frankenstein. It started out with him. But so all he is here is a hunchback dwarf of an assistant named Fritz. It's not until later movies that we actually get Bela Lugosi playing Igor as a character. But in that movie, he wasn't like a hunched back dwarf assistant in it at all. So it's kind of crazy how like eventually over time and through the years, we just start to associate the name Igor with Fritz as a character. But Fritz here is basically the mold and outline for what we know as, you know, the typical Igor type of assistant, right? We started with the two of them grave robbing, basically. They're waiting out. There's this funeral service that's going on. And then the two of them, as soon as the service ends and the grave digger has finished burying the coffin here, they then move in and start immediately unburying this coffin. They start throwing piles of dirt behind them. And what I think is really, really interesting here is that when Henry is digging up the grave, he is throwing shovels of dirt behind him, and he starts throwing these shovelfuls of dirt into the face of an Angel of Death statue. This basically signals his disregard for death and his belief in his own mastery of it, which some people might say is like kind of an accident, but I have seen reports that it was basically like James Whale's request of him, say, hey, make sure when you're throwing this dirt behind you, throw it into the face of death, right? Defy death by creating this life in this thing that you in your endeavors here, right? So I love after they unbury this body, Victor is like cradled up close to the coffin here, and he says,
he's just resting, waiting for a new life to come.
There's such good quotable lines in this movie that are just so incredible. So the first scene that we see here is the two of them digging up this grave at this graveyard, right? Then immediately as they're taking this coffin away, we find them coming upon a gallows where there's a man hung up in the air, and Henry sends Fritz up under the rafters to then cut the body down. Now this is incredibly, like, this is blasphemous stuff here. We're talking defiling graves, cutting down corpses, touching and moving them from stuff. This is something it's not only horrifying in the sense of the horror of like having the Frankenstein's monster as this terrifying creature, right? It is something that is so, you didn't see this in movies. You didn't talk about death. You didn't showcase the bodies. There's even a bit where they put a microphone inside of the coffin so that when the gravedigger was throwing shovelfuls of dirt on top of it, you could hear this loud thud on top of the coffin. Like, this is something that truly did terrify people. Like, it is really, really scary here. But these sets we find themselves walking through are so gorgeous to look at. It is very obvious that they took a lot of inspiration from old German expressionist films, things like, you know, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, The Magician, the Metropolis is another one that really inspired this one. The Golem as well. Like, you can see it in like the contrast. Like, I think actually I don't want to see versions of this movie that are in color. I think the black and white is such a striking image for all of it. The contrast, the way that they use the light and the shadow, the cloudy backdrop of it, the way that these crosses in this graveyard and the statue and the picket fence, they're all like at weird, like obtuse angles. Like, I think it is a really, really beautiful scene just to see them walking through. So I think not only is it such a cool horror movie, it also looks really, really great. But so Victor needs bodies for his experiments. He's basically decided he wants to create human life with these discarded refuse and these bodies that he's then going to piece together bit by bit to create his perfect specimen, you know, to put together a body. And so he collects a body from a graveyard. He gets a body hanging from the gallows. He sends Fritz up. He's not very nice to Fritz this entire time as his assistant. He's constantly calling him a fool, mocking him, you know. And so Fritz goes up, and I love this bit where cuts the body down, and then he goes, here's the knife, and throws it down. And then he goes,
here I come.
And then he drops into frame, but he doesn't drop downwards into frame. He kind of comes from the side of it. It's just funny to me that he obviously didn't jump down from the heights. But Henry, not Victor, God, it's going to happen the whole time. Henry then tells him, oh no, the neck is broken, you know, so this body's no good, because he's looking for a good brain specifically. That is what he's on the hunt for right at this moment, right? Which is kind of funny to me. I know that the neck doesn't always break when you hang a victim, but like, I feel like it's pretty common if a person is hung by their neck that they're going to break it. So I think it's kind of a strange place. So where else can you get a good brain for your experiments? Why you can go to the Goldstadt Medical College. So here we see a scene break in where we see Edward Van Sloan playing Dr. Waldman here. He is teaching a class, basically talking about the human brain. Dr. Waldman shows his class the brain of an average human being and then the corrupted brain of a criminal for comparison. So on his desk, he's got these two little jars full of formaldehyde and a brain inside of it. One of them is a normal brain, the other one being an abnormal brain, which became a huge thing in Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein with the abnormal brain, right? But so there's a huge emphasis put on the brain here being a criminal brain, and we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, Henry sends Fritz to then steal the brain from Dr. Waldman's class after he finishes, right? So Fritz sneaks in and he grabs for some reason he takes the lid off of the top of the normal brain, takes the lid off. He's walking away with it. He bumps into a skeleton, which, fun fact, is actually a real skeleton. Apparently in the 1930s, it was cheaper and faster to get a real ass human skeleton rather than getting like a plastic rendition of it. So Fritz runs into the skeleton, scares himself. He grabs the spray and takes the lid off. And then for some reason, there's just this loud gong sound that goes off in the building. I'm not sure exactly where this gong came from. It's kind of a funny sound effect. But this gong goes off and it makes Fritz drop his brain here. So now he's like, oh shit, I have no brain here. Let me scramble and just go grab another one. So what he does is he accidentally grabs the criminal brain, and that is the brain that they decide to put inside of the creature. Now, unbeknownst to him, Henry Frankenstein has a corrupt brain that he's going to be putting inside of his monster. So after we see this, we get a scene of Henry's fiancée, Elizabeth Lavenza, who is speaking with their friend Victor about a peculiar note or a letter that she's received from Henry. It's so funny to me that she's basically like, Victor, I don't understand this. I can't make any sense of this. And within the note, he basically tells her exactly what's going on. I'm working on my experiments. I'm up in the mountain in this watchtower, you know, nobody's here to watch me except for Fritz for some reason he mentions. He's like, nobody's here except Fritz, my assistant. But he basically says, leave me alone. I need to work on my experiments. So he basically explicitly tells her what is going on here. But for some reason, Elizabeth is super, confused about all of this. But she goes to Victor and she says, I need help with this. What are we supposed to do? And then Victor also says, yes, I ran into him walking in the woods one day. He was raving about his experiments and how he didn't want anybody to bother him. So as people who care and love about him, they decide that they want to go and help him out. There's also a weird moment here where it's clear that Elizabeth is in love with Henry, right? She cares about him. She wants to know he's okay. And Victor still sees this as an opportunity to be like, I wish you cared for me like this, and it's such an awkward moment where even Elizabeth is like, Victor, we can't. He's like, I'm sorry. And so the two of them awkwardly, after this exchange, go to seek the help of Henry's old professor from college, Dr. Waldman, to try to get an understanding of his behaviors and what's going on here, because they're concerned for him, right? So they go and they request some help of him. It's a pretty short sequence here. There are some good lines here where Dr. Waldman tells him,
Frankenstein was interested only in human life. First to destroy it, then recreate it. There you have his mad dream.
So he's aware of what's going on here and what Henry must be up to up in his tower. So without much convincing, they gather the help of Dr. Waldman and they make their way to the watchtower, the iconic tower where Henry Frankenstein is conducting his experiments. It's a stormy night. Henry and Fritz are running about the laboratory, getting their instruments all together. It is the iconic look of a mad scientist laboratory, right? They're just random contraptions all over the place that are spouting electricity and lighting up, and all of these crazy noises are coming from them. You can hear this thunder and lightning. The rain is coming through the top of the ceiling. It is all a chaotic mess, right? And as they're trying to get their preparations ready for this perfect storm to finally bring life to this creature that they've put together, this body that they fashioned to be struck with lightning here to bring it to imbue it with life, the trio comes up. It is Elizabeth and Victor and Dr. Waldman show up at the door, knocking. And Henry wants nothing to do with them. So he sends Fritz to the door and he says, go check it out. Fritz mutters to himself and makes his way all the way down the staircase. And then he opens the shutter on the door. He says, he's busy now. Go away. And he just immediately shoos them away. It is pouring rain at this time. Like, it is not an easy, like, these people are not, they need shelter. No matter what happens here, if they can't come bother Frankenstein, they're like, we need to get in here. So they end up making their way inside after they call up through the window, and Henry hears them. He goes down. He sees Elizabeth is there. So he's like, oh shit, I should probably open this door, right? So the storm rages, and Elizabeth implores him, like, please, I don't understand what's happening here. And Henry is actually very sweet with her. He says, oh, don't you understand? You'll ruin everything. You must go. And she tells him basically, Henry, I believe in you, but I cannot leave you tonight. So he's inclined to maybe let them in. But then his entire demeanor changes here when Victor comes up to him and says, Henry, you're inhuman. You're crazy. And he takes such offense to being called crazy. And another iconic line here. This sequence right here is where we get like the bulk of the iconic lines that everybody knows from Frankenstein, where he goes,
Crazy, am I? We'll see whether I'm crazy or not.
And so he basically takes this as a challenge to be like, oh, you want to call me crazy? Okay, come on up. come and see what I've been working on. So he invites them up into his laboratory and he sits them down to view this spectacle of it here. And he tells them about this body. They're like, you really think you can imbue life into this dead creature? And he says, that body is not dead.
It has never lived. I created it. I made it with my own hands from the bodies I took from graves, from the gallows, anywhere.
And another great moment, he says, this is a great scene, isn't it? One man crazy, 3 very sane spectators. So then we basically get into what is known as the iconic sequence here. The thunder, the lightning, it's crashing. He tells Fritz to go flip the switches and prepare his work. They hoist on this metal table. They get the creature, Frankenstein's monster, on this like operating table, basically, right? And he is covered with these tarps. They have to remove these coverings from him. And you see him all wrapped up in bandages, all except his flat top head, which is such a great look. And they pull on this chain and he ascends up into the heavens as this, it's really overwhelming, actually, the sound effects that are going on in this. Like, it's overwhelming to me in this year. I can't imagine in 1930 the cacophony of the thunder sound effects, the rain, the lightning, thunder sounds, all of it coming down in this crazy this spectacle as the body's lifted and ascended into the heavens. It is such a neat effect because up until this point, all of the sets have had such an incredible sense of like verticality, and all of the sets are so straight up and down and so deep, barreling far away from the camera. And that's not really something you usually get in these sets in these older movies, right? Typically in this rectangle frame that you get on a film screen, you usually go a lot wider with the shots, but these ones went really, really vertical, which I think is so fun. And it all seems like it was all a build up to this moment here where we have, you know, this creature being hoisted up into the heavens. It goes up there and it's actually still ambiguous what happens to the creature upstairs. You know, we don't actually know what goes on up there. We assume it gets struck with lightning, but like, I kind of like the mystery around it because in Mary Shelley's original novel, she actually doesn't delve into exactly what it is that brings this creature to life. It's actually funny. If you go back and read it, there's very little detail in what happens. Basically, Victor, as the creator in the book, goes through months and months of research. He's gathering these parts to put this creature together, and then it kind of just happens. Because basically what happens in the story is that Victor is retelling his tale to this man, this captain of a boat way up in like the North Pole, basically. And he is retelling his tale to him. So he deliberately is not telling him how he created the creature. He even remarks on that. He's like, I'm sure you would like to know what I did, but like, hear my story to the end and you understand why I'm not going to tell you what happens to this, like how I brought this creature to life. So I kind of like the ambiguity in the movie as well. Like, we don't actually know what happens. There's a bunch of sparking lightning equipment. He gets struck by lightning up in the air and then he gets brought back down. All of the electrical equipment and stuff that makes up this mad scientist laboratory, which became so iconic, were all created by a man named Kenneth Strickfaden, who basically was known for, he was kind of like, he didn't work for Universal. I guess he was like an independent contractor who did nothing but create these crazy contraptions. And he's gone on to quote that he basically just like put them together from junk that he had around the place and just would put together things that served no purpose, no function other than to create a bunch of sound and lighting effects. There's like these cool, you know, these Tesla coil looking things, these plasma balls that just sparked electricity. So I think it's really fun that he's the guy that put all this together. Fun fact about that actually is that he went on to do some other work. Like, he did other Universal projects. He also did work on like the Wizard of Oz, which is really fun. And his original creations actually were in the same sequence that was mimicked in Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein, because Mel Brooks basically discovered, oh, this guy's still alive. Let me hit him up. And not only was he still alive and was willing to help him, he said, oh, actually, those pieces that I used in the original Frankenstein movie, I actually still have in my garage. So if you watch that sequence in Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein, the sequence of like bringing the creature to life is actually utilizing a lot of the same instruments as you see in this movie here. But so the body is lowered down after this crazy night, and you see the hand of it start to twitch and twitch. And this is where you get to the iconic, the de facto scene that everybody knows from Frankenstein. It is a scene where Henry Frankenstein comes up to it and says,
It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. Oh, in the name of God. Now I know what it feels like to be God.
And what's wild about this is like, again, incredibly blasphemous, so much so that it actually was cut from the movie for a long, long time. The censors saw that line. They're like, absolutely not. We are not going to have a man on screen protesting that he is unto a god, right? Initially, in some areas, what they did was they took the dialogue of that line specifically and they lowered its volume and then cut over it with like a lightning strike, right? The sound of thunder. In other renditions of the movie, there actually were just straight hard cuts where you can clearly see him like teleport on screen basically, and he moves to another spot. They just completely omit the line 100%. But that basically ends our iconic creation of the monster sequence in this movie. And it's kind of interesting. We're about 25 minutes into the movie now. We have not seen this creature at all yet. They're really, really holding this off on us. All we've seen so far is his body covered in bandages like a mummy and the flat top of his hair. And that's pretty much all we've seen thus far. But so moving on from after this sequence, it basically ends there with Henry saying, now I know what it feels like to be God, as Victor and Dr. Waldman are like holding him down in his raving, like lunatic stupor, I guess. And now we get a scene that is so bizarre to me. So Victor and Elizabeth go back to the, I guess, the Frankenstein estate to go to Baron Frankenstein, who is Henry's father, to tell him Victor's okay, don't worry about him. Let's talk about Baron Frankenstein here. He is basically acting in his own movie. Like he is a completely different character. I don't know what he is doing here, but he is not in the same movie as everybody else. He is such a weird amount of comedic relief, like a levity in the movie, which was, I guess, was actually James Whale's deliberate approach to this character in the scene afterwards, where he's basically like, that scene was pretty heavy, was a lot of horror elements in the sequence of creating the monster. So let's give you a sequence with Baron Frankenstein, who was such a crotchety old kind of man. He is upset at the fact that Henry still isn't home. He doesn't have a solid explanation for him. He's like, I don't understand what my son's on about. And so he basically, in this one sequence, decides, completely without any evidence to back this up, he basically says, oh, I know what you're afraid to tell me. There's another woman. I know there is, and I'm going to find her. And so he's just such a funny, weird old man that sits in the middle of this, however, doesn't detract from the film either. I don't know how he's able to do that. I think him and also Dwight Fry as Fritz in the movie are really heightened versions of these characters that somehow help to ground the rest of the movie. But yeah, basically we get a sequence with him where he's upset that Henry isn't home. The Burgomaster comes into the homestead, who is basically like the mayor of the town here in this little German place, and he basically says, Herr Baron, I must ask you, when is the wedding going to be? And Baron Frankenstein's like, if my son doesn't come to his senses, there will be no wedding. And so the Burgomaster is basically worried that, this wedding isn't going to happen. The whole village has made these big grand preparations for there to be this celebration of this wedding, right? And so Baron Frankenstein is such a jerk to him this entire time. He's like, oh, what is it? What is it? If you got trouble, I've got trouble enough. He says, no trouble, Baron. No trouble. There's nothing but trouble. There's always trouble. And he's just rude to him the whole time, says there's not going to be a wedding, and so takes it upon himself to say, I know that there's another woman and I'm going to find her. So excuses himself to go on his old man journey to the watchtower to basically go find Henry and bring him home himself. He's like, Victor and Elizabeth, you failed me. I'm going to go get him myself. Moving on from this, we get a scene where we see Henry Frankenstein and Dr. Waldman sitting together in his laboratory, and Dr. Waldman kind of implores with him, you've created a monster here, you need to destroy this thing, you don't understand what you're doing. And Henry is actually incredibly cool about the situation. He's in a nice suit now instead of his, laboratory smock or whatever he was wearing. And he's like sitting here smoking, cool as can be, not concerned at all, which is a huge difference from how Victor reacts in the book, basically immediately seeing his creature as a monster and locking it away, running away from it. Like he immediately shows cowardice. This version, Henry here is like, cool as a cucumber, cannot be bothered about this whole fact. But Dr. Waldman basically tells him, you're in danger here and you don't understand what you're going through. And then Henry gets into this long-winded thing where he's basically like, have you never wanted to do something dangerous, Doctor? Where should we be if nobody tried to find out what lies beyond? And basically tries to tell him, what he's doing here is for the good of science and of study. There are things to learn here. He seems really overly confident in his creation here. And then he kind of like mockingly tells him, about the brain that he put inside of his creature. And he goes, you should know, Dr. Waldman, it came from your classroom. And then Dr. Waldman tells him the brain that was stolen from my laboratory, from my classroom, was a criminal brain. And immediately Henry goes kind of cold here. He kind of immediately takes a moment. He's contemplating that. He's like thinking it over. And then he goes, well, after all, the brain is just a bit of dead tissue. And so he tries to put it out of his mind. He really tries to rid himself of the thoughts here. I really take issue with the fact that they use a criminal brain and how that's a huge thing here, because it basically lets like Henry off the hook here. Anything that happens, any monstrous deeds that this creature then enacts in this movie, it's like it can all be chalked down to, oh, well, of course he had a criminal brain. It has nothing to do with the fact that I did not raise it properly. I brought it into this world in such a cruel and a cold manner. No. It's just because it has a criminal brain. And I think that's that's one thing that I have against this movie and its adaptations of it, which again is kind of more against the play rendition of it, not so much the actual story here. But Henry goes on to explain that he's kept the monster in the dark, and he's giving it time for its brain to develop. While it may be a criminal brain, the brain needs to develop, and he basically understands that it's a whole new creature. It's basically a child in this movie, right? So then we get one of the most important bits of the movie here, the actual entrance of Boris Karloff as the creature itself. It is such a good scene. So what we get is a door opens, and then there's a thud, thud, thud. We see the intense silhouette of the creature, this big blocky man that fills up the entire doorway, sitting at about like 6 foot 6 inches, I want to say, fills in the doorway, walking backwards. And we just see him slowly lumber into the room and then slowly turn around. And we reveal the side profile of this wonderful makeup, this Neanderthal type of large forehead, the flat top of his head, this like large, what looks like a bolt, this electrode sticking out of his neck, this scar coming down the line of his chin. And he slowly turns around, and we see him in the light now. We see him with these sunken in eyelids and these sunken in eye sockets, these heavy eyelids, and a cheek that is sunken in as well. These gaunt features, this scar up on his forehead, this bit of metal that is up on the top ridge of his skull. And we get a close-up shot of him, and then an even closer close-up shot of him that really showcases the beauty of Jack Pierce's makeup. It is truly one of the best, if not the best, makeup looks ever put onto film. Like, it is truly a masterpiece here, and you see it in all of its glory here. And not to mention the costume here. He's put up in all these padding that make him look like such a hulking beast. They've shortened the arms of his suit that make it look so easy. His arms are longer and weirdly disproportionate. He's got these incredibly thick soles of his shoes that are like asphalt layers boots that apparently weighed like 13 pounds each. But it is truly a sight to behold. It is wonderful. And it's an incredible departure from how Mary Shelley describes the creature in the book. Shelley describes the creature as having yellow skin which scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath, and watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dull white sockets in which they were set. So it's Karloff's embodiment of the creature here that really captured viewers' hearts and, pop culture imagination. But like how I would describe Boris Karloff's portrayal here, it locked certain elements into the physical appearance of the monster: the high forehead, the flat top head, sunken cheeks, oversized limbs, the undersized clothing, and a lumbering gait, creating this look that is instantly recognizable. It is so, you can tell it is such good design, because I think you could take just a couple strokes of a pencil, and within a few seconds, you could probably understand, oh, that's Frankenstein's monster. I know the way that this creature looks. We have this wonderful introduction to the character here. So we now have our Monsterific monster who has entered the scene. He is lumbering around. He walks so stiff immediately. Like, it's kind of funny. He kind of goes on a journey throughout the movie. As he starts out, he's incredibly stiff with his movements. His arms hardly move at all. He takes stiff steps one after the other. No fluidity in him at all. He's like a tin man with no oil. His body is made of wood. And apparently Boris Karloff did have some braces on his legs that basically made it so he could hardly bend his legs at all. He basically has these stiff legs that walk as if he's, a wooden man brought to life. We see him walk, and then Henry tells him, he puts him in front of this chair and he tells him, sit down. And then with a little hesitation, he eventually sits. So we see that he can understand basic prompts and commands, right? So then Henry thinks it'll be a good idea to open this hatch up in the ceiling of the tower that lets in sunlight. And it's a beautiful scene here. It's one of the more important that shows you he is not just a monster, but he's human and he has thoughts and feelings. Because when the sunlight hits Frankenstein's monster, it immediately feels it. It feels the warmth of it. It looks up into the sun. And what does it do? It immediately reaches its arms up, he immediately reaches his arms up to the heavens and tries to grab it. Like you can see him kind of grasp at the sunlight. Henry then closes the shutters, closes the hatch on the ceiling, locking him away in the darkness again. And there is such a sadness within Boris Karloff's portrayal of the creature here. And I think that is something so wonderful about what Boris brought to this role, is it is so much more than just some stupid lumbering creature with a criminal's brain, right? It has this emotion, this depth to it that he showcases in his body, his eyes, the way his hands go out to Henry after he closes the hatch in the ceiling, and he's kind of like pleading for him. You know, he's like, where did it go? You know, where's the sunlight? Bring it back to me. You know, it is such a touching portrayal of it here. And then that is all ruined when Fritz walks into the room and immediately just starts screaming at it. He's got a torch in hand and starts taunting the creature with it, which then of course causes the creature to panic and freak out and start, you know, thrashing about the place. He's very confused. He doesn't understand what's happening. There's this thing that is hurting him that Fritz is putting in his face. And even the Dr. Waldman and Henry Frankenstein try to push him away, and he deliberately goes out of his way to put the torch in his face. So unfortunately, they have to subdue the monster now. And they're like, it's a creature, you know, it's a monster. It's dangerous. You need to put it down. And so they eventually take the monster and lock him away in this dungeon, basically downstairs. They shackle him up. And then you see Fritz taking a whip and actually whipping him, taunting him with the torch again. And Henry comes in and basically tells him to stop. And he says, "Oh, leave him alone. Leave him alone." He takes the whip away from Fritz and then leaves the room. Fritz is still free to do whatever he wants with the monster. So then you see him torturing him with a torch in hand, making him cower away into this corner. He's hiding away on the ground, swatting at this torch, you know, get it away, get it away. Fritz is such an asshole for no reason. And I think the best explanation that I could come up with it for is that basically Henry does not treat him very well, right? He's poor to his assistant, always calling him a fool and beating him. I don't know if he beats him necessarily, but he's not kind to him. So I think there's some kind of weird power dynamic here where Fritz sees the monster as less than himself, and so he sees it as an opportunity to then enact his, you know, take out his revenge on his creature. You know, basically this creature is paying for the sins of his father in a way, right? After we see him basically torturing the monster in a horrible fashion, we then hear Fritz scream out. We see Dr. Waldman and Henry upstairs in the laboratory reading through books, trying to understand what to do about their situation. And then they hear this ghastly shriek from Fritz. They rush downstairs and they open the dungeon door to find that Fritz has been killed and hung in the quarters of this dungeon that the monster has been placed in. And then the monster kind of just stands in front of it in this looming presence and then walks towards Dr. Waldman and Henry, who then lock it away in the room. And they're like, okay, what do we do now? What are we supposed to do with this creature? And it is Dr. Waldman's idea, we need to sedate it. So they go and get this syringe of this half-grain solution that they then plan to insert into the creature to then put it to sleep, and then they're going to then probably destroy the creature. So they enact their plan. They get the monster outside of the room. Henry is, you know, taunting him with this torch, trying to get his attention. And while his attention is away from Dr. Waldman, who was hiding behind the corner, he then injects the syringe into him and he falls unconscious. Not before he does knock back Dr. Waldman for a second. You think he might be dead, but you're not so sure. And then he starts to wrap his hands around the neck of Henry Frankenstein and starts to choke him. But before he can finish the job there and actually kill him, you can see him. You can almost see like the stars in front of his eyes, the birds around his head as he like kind of like wiggles his hands in front of him. His eyes kind of flutter, and then he falls. He drops down. Immediately after this, well, there's a knock at the door. Who could be at the door? It is Victor, his friend, who basically tells the two of them, "Henry, you have to be quick. Elizabeth and your father are on their way up the mountain right now. They're coming to see you." So now the three men, so it's Victor, Henry, and Dr. Waldman, they take the creature and lock it away in the dungeon again as it's passed out. And then the wonderful, lovable Baron Frankenstein comes up. And again, in his silly fashion, he is just making a huff about everything. "Oh, is this where my son's been living? What is this, the front door?" They let him inside. And he's like, "Well, you're trying to burn the place down." And he's got a torch lying on the ground there. And he's just making a big to-do, a big huff. And he's like, "You know, what's all this tummy rot about," is what he calls it. And he comes comes to see Dr. Waldman, and Dr. Waldman is like, the only sane one that he sees in the situation, being an older fellow like himself. And Dr. Waldman basically advises him, hey, I advise you take Henry away from here. It's funny. Baron Frankenstein's like, whoa, what do you think I'm here for? Pleasure? And so him and Elizabeth go upstairs to get Henry, and Elizabeth opens the door into the laboratory. Henry starts walking towards her and then immediately collapses, because you have to imagine he's been under an incredible amount of stress. Who knows how long he's been trying to care for this creature, racking with the guilt of it and everything that he's done here. Not to mention he did just barely finish almost getting choked out by this thing. So yeah, he passes out and then falls to the floor. So then everybody, clamors to him, and they get him onto this couch. They give him some brandy. And so it's basically decided, we're going to take him away from here. We're going to take him back home. So then after this, it's assumed that they've taken him out of the place. We see Dr. Waldman conducting, basically his dark deed of destroying the creature, right? So he's writing some notes about how the creature is getting stronger. It's taking bigger and bigger doses to get it to stay down. He's going to perform a surgery immediately. So he's got him on this operating table, and he's about to do some work on him. He puts his head to its heart to listen to its heartbeat, which is leaving him exposed. We see the creature's eyes open up, and it takes his arms and it grabs him from the back of the neck and then uses his other hand and then chokes him to death. I'm not sure who taught Frankenstein's monster how to choke somebody out, but it's like his main method of killing people, right? But basically, the monster is loose now. It has successfully killed Dr. Waldman in basically what I would call self-defense, and then manages to get its way down the huge staircase of the tower and out the front door. So now the monster is on the prowl. It is out and loose and ready to kick some caboose. We then see Henry and Elizabeth sitting out in the nice backyard of their estate, wherever that may be, and basically Henry wants to immediately, his mode of recourse here is just to try to continue with life as normal, just try to ignore the fact that he made this creature that has now killed another person that he's not even aware of yet. And he's like, I know what we shall do. Let's go through with the wedding. Let's try it. Let's get the wedding up and going immediately. And they do. The next scene is the wedding in full swing. The town is going nuts. It's exactly what everybody has wanted. It's a great reason to celebrate, have some beer, have some wine, enjoy themselves to their heart's content. But next is one of the most important scenes in the movie. It is the most important sequence to me personally, connecting with this monster here and making it much more sympathetic than Bela Lugosi maybe thought it was originally when he turned down the role. But this is the pivotal moment for the creature in the movie. It is when the creature meets Maria, this young little girl. So we see a farmer and his daughter Maria. She's got a cute little cat. He's got to go off to check his traps. So he's like, I'll be back, Maria. She goes, goodbye, Daddy. Goodbye now. It's a very, very sweet. They're just the cutest little father-daughter little duo. Then we see the monster enter through the reeds because he's confused. He's just walking through the countryside. He doesn't know where he's at. Maria's immediate response, she's shocked. She's definitely not, this isn't a normal thing for her to see, but she's not immediately put off by the creature. In fact, she asks him what he is. He doesn't respond, and she just takes that. She goes, you want to play? And so she allows him to sit with her, play this game with her, and he is so into this. She sits down and she starts handing him some flowers, and he takes them. He's admiring how small her little hands are, because you have to imagine, if he was conceivably just born, he was born a whole adult, right? He doesn't know. He's never seen hands so small. He didn't grow from the size of a baby. It's just all so fascinating, so new to him. And she has him play this game with him. She takes her flowers. She goes, look, I can make a boat. And so she throws the top half of her flowers into the water, and he sees that they float. And so she prompts that he does the same. So he takes his little flower, breaks off the top of it, throws it into the water, and look at that. It floats. It is such a sweet and innocent scene where, this is all about the whole nature versus nurture thing, right? Where there are adults who have their biases against this creature. They see him immediately run and treat him with these cruelties and beat him. She's a child. She doesn't have any of that ingrained in her yet. She just sees him as a person, and she treats him with kindness immediately, and that's just not something he's used to. So it's such a sadness to it in the scene as well. The two of them, she takes him to play this game with her. He throws all of his flowers into the water, and then he runs out of flowers. And so him just trying to prolong and continue this game in the good spirit of it, he tries to find something else that he can throw into the water that will then float. Unfortunately, the thing that is closest to him is Maria herself. So we see the monster reach forward, pick her up, scoop her. She does start to protest, stop, you're hurting me. And then he can't understand that. He throws her into the water, and then she subsequently drowns. And he, in a panic, runs away, ashamed of what he's done, confused, and just runs from the scene of the crime. Initially, when they shot this scene, censors again thought this would be too much, but I think they actually hurt the scene by doing this, because what actually happens in the cut is you see him reach towards her, and then cut. You don't see him take her and drop her, flop her into the water. I think that has much more sinister implications, because then it's left to the viewer to decide, well, what happened after he reached for her? Did he break her neck? Did he strangle her like the other people? It's a lot more sinister than actually seeing him going through with throwing her in the water, and that's how she drowns. And it's unfortunate because it is truly an accident. He didn't mean to kill her. He didn't know she couldn't float, couldn't swim, none of that. He just wanted to continue playing the game, but it is so heartbreaking. And Boris Karloff was so sweet to this little girl, and this little girl, she was also very sweet to the monster. Everyone was worried that she, seeing the monster, because, people were fainting, he had to be covered with a bag, in order to walk between the sets. They were all worried that she was going to be scared and run away from him, not want to do the scenes. But apparently when they were meeting up to drive to the location, the little Maria runs up to him immediately and asks if they can ride together. And Boris Karloff, being such a sweetheart, goes, well, would you, darling? He would love nothing more than that. It's so funny to me that he is known for playing this, this monstrous creature, but in reality, he is such a sweetheart. He is the antithesis of this monster. He's so opposite end of the spectrum for this thing, right? They couldn't be further from each other. But now, unfortunately, Maria is dead, and so the only creature that has shown him kindness in this world is now gone, and he doesn't know what to do with it. So he then runs off, and it is such a sad sequence here. We then cut back to the wedding, and Henry is greeting all of his guests, and Elizabeth comes in, and she goes, I know I shouldn't be seeing you right now, but I need to talk to you. And she takes him into another room and basically explains to him that she's got this bad feeling, Dr. Waldman still isn't here, and that's unusual, something is not right. And he's like, oh, you're just being silly, don't worry about it, let's put these issues to rest, I'm sure it'll all be fine. Little does he know, Victor is about to run into the room, and he tells him Dr. Waldman is dead. The monster is on the loose, and he's probably going to be arriving here immediately. They then hear the sounds of the monster. We haven't talked much about this yet. The Boris Karloff as the creature does have a titular sound effect. It's basically just these grunts and growls that are all and we all know that if I were to ask somebody to make a Frankenstein sound, they'd probably do something like that. But they start to hear it throughout the household. So then Victor and Henry go throughout the house trying to figure out where these sounds are coming from. Henry is such a dunce that he decides the best course of action here is to lock Elizabeth in her room. So he's like, oh, the monster's not in this room, she'll be fine, locks her away, and then goes to scour the household to try to find this creature. And it's unclear whether or not the creature is actually making these sounds throughout the household, or if they're just like the groans and moans of a house, just like these the sound effects of like, a house makes creaking sounds, right? They kind of make sounds like this. So it's like either the creature was throwing its voice throughout the house, or it's just a good bit of like sound editing here. But as they're running through the house, the monster does make its way in through Elizabeth's window into her locked bedroom. So she's trapped in here with the creature. It approaches her and then does kind of like this sexy like growl to it, which is kind of funny. I know that's not the intent, but it's a funny bit that happens here. Elizabeth screams in terror at the sight of this monster. Henry then hears her screams, goes, oh no, it's in her bedroom. They come down and they see that she has fainted onto her bed. She is okay. She hasn't died, which is a huge departure from what happens in the book. So let's talk a little bit about where things have gone incredibly far and strayed far from the original text of the 1818 novel. In this rendition of the movie, we are missing so much of what makes the creature a sympathetic, important human creature. There's an entire sequence where after leaving the night of his creation, he's wandering about in the woods. He comes across some people. They treat him with, this harshness, this cruelty. They beat him. They shoot him. They try to get him out. He eventually takes up shelter outside of this little house, this hut, where there's a family living there. And specifically, there's a man who is blind. He's this hermit who lives here who cannot see him. And he hides away outside of their domicile for months and months and months. And eventually through them and listening to them and watching them through the cracks of their walls, he is able to learn English and learn about their ways and people and culture and, where there actually can be kindness in the world. He eventually, this isn't about the book. To make a long story short, he eventually decides the best way for him to integrate himself into society is to introduce himself to this blind man, because the blind man cannot immediately see him as a monster. And he hopes that maybe his speech that he's been working on in secret is going to be able to win his heart, and he's going to be able to, win the hearts of his children that also live in this household here as well. That unfortunately does not go well. He waits too long. He starts to talk to the blind man, and then the son comes back home, sees the creature, and immediately shoos him away. The family then immediately flees the scene. He never gets to see them again. So it is a tragic moment of him trying to reach out and connect with people and almost gets a shot. It is such a hard bit to get through in the book, because because your heart breaks for this creature. You want nothing more than for this to successfully, work out for him, but it doesn't. And so he's basically decided, you know what? Society's cruel. Society's the worst. I need someone that is like me. I need someone that can understand me, and I need companionship. So what he does is he comes to Victor, and he basically demands from him, you've created me, you've put me into this world and given me the burden of life that I did not ask for. All I ask of you is to make me a companion, make one that is like me. I demand you make me a bride, which isn't present in this version of the story in Frankenstein 1931. However, it is what basically becomes the spinoff of Bride of Frankenstein in 1935. It's what basically catalysts that. And there's a bit more elements in that one that we see from the book. Like, for instance, the blind man, he is in that version of the story in a kind of a different context. And then we also get, the actual fashioning of a bride. But basically, the creature follows Victor through his journey because he does agree to make him a bride. He's against it at first, but eventually he's, if this will get the creature out of my life for good, I think I have to follow through with this, right? I think I owe him that at least a little bit. He eventually decides, what am I doing? I cannot follow through with this. I cannot create another being like you that is killed and will kill again. So he's like halfway through the creation of this bride and tears her apart. He's like, I cannot and will not have anything to do with this. So then the creature takes a sinister turn here. He's like, if I cannot inspire love, then I will cause fear, is basically the line that he drops here, which is incredibly iconic from the novel. And he basically swears that he will follow him for the rest of his life, and he promises he will be there on his wedding night. So in the novel, there is an intent here, a malicious intent that the creature will be there on the wedding night of Victor and Elizabeth and intends to kill the bride. And he does so. He does follow through with that. However, in the movie here, he just scares her. She passes out. She doesn't actually die. So it is after this that Elizabeth has fainted and Henry decides, we need to go and hunt this creature. After this sequence happens, we get actually a very haunting moment in this movie. We see the farmer, the father of young Maria, carrying her lifeless body through the street as everybody else is still proclaiming and celebrating. They're dancing, they're playing their music. It's also worth mentioning there has been no music this entire time throughout the movie. The music in this movie is diegetic, which basically means when you see instruments in the movie playing music, when there's a source of music, there will be music. So the only times that there's actually music in this film is at the very beginning intro, the outro at the very end. There's two musics there. And then in this sequence of the wedding, right? Because the whole town is jovial and they're playing this fun, fanciful music. And it's kind of fun because since there's no soundtrack to the movie, there's nothing that dictates where you should be feeling. Because I think that's something that's really important about the score in a movie, is that it basically kind of tells you how you should be feeling, right? It's like any jump scare in a movie. You know it's about to come because the music kind of tenses up, it slows down, it swells or something, or maybe there's a lack of sound there. And then this big jolt of sound that then scares you, right? That's the jump scare. But so this movie, a lot of it, you have to decide for your own. You were not led to how you were supposed to be feeling about things at any point in time. But so the music is playing as this father is carrying the lifeless body of his daughter throughout the streets. And one by one, the townsfolk slowly start to deteriorate from their happy mood and see him and question what's happening. What is going on? Is that girl okay? And he basically forms a mob saying nothing. He just has this helpless, hopeless look on his face because who can help him? It must be the most horrible thing to experience, the death of a child like this. And so he takes her all the way to the burgomaster, and the burgomaster asks him, why have you brought this child to me? If you say she's drowned. And he goes, she's been murdered, which if you want to nitpick in this movie, you could question how does he know she's been murdered? What indicated to him? Because all we know of him is he left the house, came back, and she was drowned. There wasn't really any indicator. I think it would have been better if maybe there was just one shot of him seeing the creature walk away from her so we can kind of piece these two things together. But I'm picking at something that's a wonderful masterpiece of a movie, and important in film history. So that's just a little thing I've heard people complain about. But so after he decides that she's been murdered, and Henry also comes to the burgomaster with his, claims of this creature who has killed people, who is rampaging through his house in the countryside, they form an angry mob. And now we have the iconic sequence of this mob hunting down the creature in the dead of night. They've got their pitchforks. They are ready to take this thing down. And we get a lovely sequence of the townsfolk. They've split up. Some of them are going through, to the lake. Some of them are going all the way up into the mountains. Henry is leading his own group of people up into the mountains, where he eventually splits off from them and has his own showdown with the creature. It is such a cool scene, just this shot of the two of them, this stare down between them. And then they go to fisticuffs. They go to fight each other. And eventually the creature does knock out Henry. And as the townsfolk are running up to him, they've got these bloodhounds, that are chasing after him. He picks up the body of Henry and makes his way off to another iconic scene here, the windmill, where he then takes the body of Frankenstein. He's being chased by these people. He's not sure what to do. And so he takes him all the way to the top of this windmill here with these townsfolk with their pitchforks right outside. They're screaming. They want the monster out. They want to get Henry. I believe there's like a banister that comes down and locks the door so they can't even get in, even if they wanted to, even if the monster wanted to let them in. This sequence here is something that actually led to many hardships for Boris Karloff for the rest of his career. In this sequence here, we're uncertain why he had him do this, but James Whale wanted this to look as believable as possible. So there's a sequence where the monster is carrying Henry all the way up the levels of this windmill, all the way to the top. So he's climbing this ladder staircase thing, completely deadlifting the whole weight of Colin Clive with him all the way to the top. And they ran the scene like upwards of 10 to 12 times over and over again. No help. He didn't have any harness to get him. There's no cool movie magic to do something like this in the 1930s. He just had to completely carry the weight of Colin Clive all the way up to the top of the windmill over and over and over again, which led to many hardships in his life, like a lifetime of back problems, several surgeries to try to fix his spine. This is the level of craft that Boris Karloff was willing to put into this. He really, really was an actor that would go through the grueling processes to make this movie happen. And it's incredibly impressive here. But how this scene basically culminates is Henry and the monster get all the way to the top of the building. Henry then tries to climb off. The monster pulls him back and instead takes his body and throws it off the edge of here. Now, it's a little funny. I hate to say it. There is a little bit of a funny moment here where he throws the body of Henry off the top of the windmill. And it's like this clearly ragdoll effect where they throw him off. He hits one of the blades of the fan completely like ragdoll, jelly bones, and then falls off onto the ground. Like, that would kill a person probably, right? But instead, he manages to land on the ground like a whole 50 feet off of the ground, and there's townsfolk around him. He is okay. He does manage to make it and survive to the end of this. So Henry doesn't die. The townsfolk see this, like, okay, well, Henry's out of the building. We just wanted one thing out of this, so now let's burn down the mill. So then they take their torches and light the windmill ablaze. And there is a horrifying sequence where the monster is trapped in this building. He has nowhere to go, nowhere to run to. There are flames all over. You can see this sadness in his eyes and the screams that he emits. Like, Boris Karloff really, really makes you feel awful for what happens to this creature here as he's surrounded in flames, the things that had terrified him back when Fritz was, taunting him with this torch. And this entire windmill goes up in a blaze of glory as the monster goes down with it. And there's just this ominous shot of the windmill from afar, and then it cuts back to an even wider shot with this cool miniature of the townsfolk and the windmill as it just goes up into nothingness and smoke, and then it blacks out. I think the movie should have ended right there. I think that would have been the best place for this sequence to end. Instead, we get a weird add-on here that I'm not incredibly fond of. I believe it was added on because the Universal execs basically said, this is too bleak of an ending. We need something a little bit more lighthearted than this. So instead, the windmill burns down. We black out from that. What we then get is a sequence where we see the maids of the servants of the household going into the room where Henry is being taken care of. He's healing from his wounds. Funny enough, since they added this scene later, Colin Clive had already gone back home to England, so he wasn't available. They actually had to use a body double to stand in for him. It was just him in his bed, like way away from the camera. His face was turned away, but we see him being tended to and taken care of by Elizabeth. And his father, again, lovable Baron Frankenstein, that guy. He comes out of the room and the servants are like, oh, well, we thought maybe, Henry would enjoy some of this wine, some of your grandfather's wine. He goes, oh, well, my son doesn't need any of this, Here's to a son and to the health of the House of Frankenstein. And they all cheer to it. And then it's ha ha ha. And then that's the end of the movie. So that's Frankenstein as simply as I can possibly tell it. I really think it would have landed so much heavier if the movie did end with the death of one Henry Frankenstein and just the burning of the mill, if that all went away. But yeah, that is Frankenstein. I think it is still a wonderful film. I think it really does still stand the test of time. Even being as old as it does, I think it still compares to a lot of movies even today. Do I think it is the best Frankenstein movie? It's hard for me to say because I think personally, I think The Bride of Frankenstein just has a little bit more of a leg up on this in other areas, but I think they're kind of in different leagues of their own. I honestly would say, since this movie's only like an hour and some change, I think it's like 70 minutes long, I would honestly say it is worth just like putting the two of them back to back, because The Bride of Frankenstein does start out right at the end of Frankenstein. We literally it picks up right where we left off. So you can watch them back to back and still have a pretty cohesive story here. So I've never seen them as like two separate entities, so it's hard for me to pit them against each other. But I do think that the Bride is just a little bit better than this one. But I think Frankenstein is a wonderful film, and it has so much to offer in it, even though it is an incredibly different interpretation of Mary Shelley's story. I think it is still a really good movie, and it is so culturally important and has led to so much more Frankenstein and everything, right? You can't say Halloween without thinking of Frankenstein. You can't think of a movie monster without thinking about this guy, his squared off head, you know, the bolts in his neck, the electrodes in his neck, and thinking, how can we forget about him? You know, he is so deep in everything, you know, in movies and culture, all of that kind of stuff. So in the movie, the creature has a kill count of only 3, truly. We have Fritz right at the top, or at least at the top of the creature story here, which honestly was self-defense. He was beating the hell out of him and kind of had it coming. I don't think he deserved to die, but like, you know, he knew what he was getting into. Henry even warns him, you know, he has the strength of 10 men, and he still thought it would be a good idea to taunt the creature and, you know, kind of ruin his life with it. And so, like, you know, I think he kind of had it coming here. Then Dr. Waldman, who was again about to kill the creature. So again, did he deserve death? No, but you know, he kind of found himself in a bad situation there. And then poor little Maria, which for all intents and purposes was an accident. He did not know. So I don't think the creature ever, you know, willingly did anything monstrous or malicious, even with the criminal brain inside of him, which again, I don't really love as a plot point in here, because I think it really does away with the responsibility for any of it, right? For the monster being treated the way he is and being pushed to these limits, you know. I think there is never any conscious choice. There's nothing that the creature relishes in any of these kills. But over time, I think the monster, I mentioned at the top that there were a lot of sequels to this movie, right? I think this is the only time we ever get the creature that is really like this. And I guess also in The Bride of Frankenstein a little bit, but we never see another performance like Karloff's in this. Not when Glenn Strange played it, not when Bela Lugosi played it. Lon Chaney Jr. also played it for a little bit. None of them really reached the level of like humanity and sympathy that exists within this creature that Boris Karloff really brought to it and made it a point to really bring to it. You know, when it came time for him to kill Maria in that one scene, the Boris Karloff actually like started an on-set fight about it, because he thought, we can't do this. There's like, can't we just let the monster be more sympathetic? And director James Whale said, this is important. It's for the ritual of the monster. We need this to happen. It has to happen this way. But as the sequels progress, we see the monster become more and more of just a lumbering, mindless slave to basically anything. In its last iterations, it basically spoke nothing, had no mind of its own, no free will. It is basically just a servant to other people. So I really think we kind of lose it and it deteriorates as it goes. But I do think, despite that, like, the Frankenstein's monster has still stood around and everything, and you know, it's a household name, Frankenstein, and I think that's really great. So as I wrap up here, I think let's get into some trivia that I didn't really get to mention during the movie here. Let's start with a focus section just on the importance of Jack Pierce's makeup, because I think it is one of the most profound, most important makeup designs in film history. Apparently, the monster's makeup design by Jack Pierce is under copyright to Universal Pictures until January 1st, 2026, and licensed by Universal Studios Licensing Incorporated. It's kind of funny because there have been, I think IMDb lists over 100 different movies that have Frankenstein in the title of it. None of them are allowed to do the creation that has the flat top head, the electrodes in the neck, any of that kind of stuff, because that look specifically is owned by Universal Studios, and apparently until January 1st of next year, which is crazy. The monster in this film does not physically resemble the character in Mary Shelley's novel. It was makeup artist Jack Pierce who came up with the innovations such as the monster's flat heads, the bolts through the neck, the droopy eyelids, and the poorly fitted suit. Any future Frankenstein film or parodies, such as like The Munsters, that features any of these physical abnormalities takes its inspiration from Pierce's makeup work. He really made the template for what this creature is going to look like. It's similar to how Bela Lugosi really started what everybody assumes is like the Dracula look, the titular vampire look. It all starts from him and the voice and all of that kind of stuff. You can't think vampire without thinking like, oh, I'm Bela Lugosi, you know? And that all started with him. Same thing here. It started with Jack Pierce's makeup design and Boris Karloff's performance that paved paved the way for every other like idea of or any iteration of Frankenstein thereafter. The only other ones that really stray from that are the ones that really tried to go more for the Mary Shelley look of it all. Boris Karloff's makeup took 4 hours each day for Jack Pierce to apply, and his cumbersome costume weighed 48 pounds in the uncomfortable heat of summer. That plus his 13-pound shoes each. Like, this thing was heavy to carry around. I remember reading that apparently Boris Karloff had lost probably like 20 pounds during the production of this, just the sweating it all off and the workouts that he had to do to get all of this. Jack Pierce is the one that really came up with the design and really brought this thing to life. However, it takes a village to make a monster. So not only was it him, there are also some reports that say, you know, there were some inspirations that apparently James Whale had put his input on. You know, he claims like, oh, I was the one that decided it was supposed to have the flat top, even though there's some debate on who actually said that kind of stuff. But not only his inspiration, it was also Boris Karloff himself that came up with a couple of clever ideas. For instance, Boris Karloff offered to remove his partial bridge work in his mouth. It's like a dental appliance, right? As part of the monster makeup to create the sunken in cheek look. So that's why if you see him, he's got this kind of like dimple in his cheek, and Jack Pierce took that and applied some makeup in that divot as well to kind of like amplify it in that look, right? And not only that, supposedly it was Karloff's idea to give the monster extremely heavy eyes. Apparently after doing some makeup tests, they would meet for weeks and weeks after hours at on the Universal lot, just like pouring in, doing the research on like what this should look like, looking into anatomy and surgeries and working together to create what would be the perfect look, which I think is so cool. After doing one of these tests, Karloff had looked at himself in the mirror and said, my eyes look too alive. And so what they did instead was they had given him these heavy eyes, making the creature look as if he was only partially aware what was going on around him. They used layers of mortician's wax to achieve this effect, just like layering them over and over again on top of the eyelids to give him that like half droopy look that we all know and love at this point. Jack Pierce was really good at like building them up, because you have to understand like makeup was different then than it is now. We do not have the technology that we have in this day and age and the means to make molds of things. So every time that they would do this, it was Jack Pierce layer by layer building the big rigid forehead using cotton and collodion to make layer and then layer again and let that harden. And so to make that look consistent and make it look so good every time is just such incredible work. And on to some other bits of trivia here. While preparing to film the scene where the monster attacks Elizabeth, Mae Clarke admitted to Boris Karloff that she was worried that when she saw him in full makeup coming towards her, she might be really frightened, even though Mae Clarke claims that like Boris Karloff was a delight to work with. He was such a sweetheart. So Karloff told her that throughout the scene, he would wiggle his pinky finger out of sight of the camera so that despite the horrific makeup, she could always see that her friend Boris was waving at her and letting her know that she was safe, because he is just such a gentleman. It's so cute. This movie is not it was not conceived as a horror movie, since the term horror as a film genre was actually first used in 1934, 3 years later. According to film historian Gregory W. Mank, director James Whale was jealous of the attention Boris Karloff's monster was getting during the production and took revenge by making the actor carry Colin Clive up the mountain to the mill in take after take dozens of times. Clive felt badly for his co-star and suggested that a dummy be used. Whale refused, and Karloff continued to carry Clive's 6-foot, 154-pound body in succeeding takes. This reportedly caused Karloff to suffer significant back problems, which required 3 major surgeries during his lifetime. So yeah, I don't know how much I buy that. Like if it was actually a jealousy thing and like he was taking out revenge on him, that's a little hard to believe, especially since after doing this film, the two of them worked on the old Dark House. So like, if it was really that bad, I doubt Karloff would have been willing to work with him a second time, but, you know, who knows. The set design of the windmill sequence was inspired by a building in Los Angeles that housed a local bakery, Vandekamp, which displayed a large windmill as its corporate logo. This take on Frankenstein was the third put to film and the first after sound was introduced to the art form. The first was a 15-minute film version in 1910, a loose adaptation of Shelley's novel with the monster appearing as a furry hunchback a la Quasimodo with a white face. This version, produced by Thomas Edison, had the monster created via chemical experimentation and the creature being defeated by the power of love, which is kind of funny. This one I found really interesting. Earl Bakken, Bakken, was partially inspired by the use of electricity in the movie Frankenstein, which fostered a childhood fascination with electricity's ability to restore life, leading to his invention of the first wearable pacemaker. So this movie has inspired so much more than you even realize. The first wearable pacemaker? That's insane. And the last bit of trivia that I have here to round us out is just that in the sequence where we talked about how Boris Karloff fought to not throw Maria into the water, he lost out on that, unfortunately. even though they ended up cutting it for a small bit and adding it in anyway. The sequence, like, he felt bad having to throw a little girl into the water, right? She was only, a small child. And unfortunately, after the first take of it, it wasn't what they needed. She didn't go far out enough or didn't sink well enough. And so they needed to do it again. And so James Whale had to come up to the actress playing Maria and say, hey, I'm so sorry. Do you think we could do it again? I'll give you anything you want. Now, this young actress, Marilyn Harris, she had kind of a tough life. Her mom basically was like a dance mom, where she basically wanted a life of stardom. She missed it's past her prime. So instead, she takes it out on her poor young daughter. And so she didn't treat her very well, always kept her on the strict diet. Her father was abusive. It was awful. So James Whale asks her, you can have anything in the world. We just need to shoot the scene one more time. What can we get for you? And her request, because of her strict diet, often was just a dozen eggs. That's all I want. Just give me a dozen eggs. They filmed the scene again. It worked out greatly. And James Whale gifted her with not 1 dozen eggs, but 2 dozen eggs. And I think that is a wonderfully light way to end this episode here. But yeah, guys, that is going to do it for us here on Monsterific. Thank you so much for letting me sit here and rant to you about a movie like this. This is the first episode, and I don't know what I'm doing here. If this is just a bunch of rambling, I'm sorry. I'm going to work on getting this more concise and all of that kind of stuff, but I had a good time, and I hope you had a good time too. We'll be back to your regularly scheduled That Was Horrible programming in just a short minute here, but if this is something that people like, if something I can do a little bit more of, I would not mind doing some more of them and slipping them into our stream a little bit. But yeah, the idea for this is actually that it's going to become like a YouTube kind of thing with more visuals on the monster and stuff like that, maybe not as long-winded and get into the whole plot breakdown of the entire movie. But for now, this is what it's going to be in its podcast format. And I enjoy doing it. So, I'll keep at it. Let me know what you think, what you think of Frankenstein. If you've ever seen it, do you think it's very scary? Let me know, please. But yeah, so thank you for joining me here. And remember, there are such things as monsters.